All righty, welcome to the discussion session of Tuesday, June 13th. We'll start with review of tonight's agenda. Andrew McGill, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's agenda, we have a public hearing for an ordinance amending the charter regarding commission vacancies. The proposed ordinance would result in commission vacancies being filled on the normal 2-year election cycle. We also have the consideration of a resolution related to the Alcosan regionalization of the trunk source. We talked about that in a prior discussion session. We have the consideration of execution of renewal of a contract to provide deer management services for the 2023-2024 season. We have the consideration of the execution of a 1-year extension of the assignment of a school resource officer for the Mount Lebanon School District. And finally, we have the consideration of the execution of a 5-year contract with the Service Employees International Union Local 32 BJ. That is the union that represents our crossing.
Great, thank you. Next up, sidewalk installation policy. It means it's going to give us a presentation.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So tonight's discussion session has a lot of talk about right-of-way infrastructure. I'll be talking about sidewalks, and then following me will be the gateway presentation about streets and paving. So a lot of right-of-way talk tonight. With me tonight is Greg Wharton, our Planning and Sustainability Coordinator. Greg is also one of the co-liaisons to the Environmental Sustainability Board. So this sidewalk policy amendment portion really started with the ESB doing a lot of work. So Greg is here to talk about the ESB's input and then answering questions the commission might have on how the process works through the ESB. Also, we have some folks from Gateway Engineers here as well, and I'll probably be mentioning them as well as a solicitor. So just as some overview for tonight, because we do have a lot to talk through, there's kind of two key points overall. There's the existing sidewalk expansion policy, which was approved in 2013. And then there are the statutory powers that the commission has within the municipal code. So those both exist as sort of separate vehicles for potential installation of sidewalks. So I'll talk about both of them sometimes somewhat interchangeably, but those are kind of the two key prongs of where we're going with this. We've heard a lot of resident feedback through our Ascend Lebo comprehensive planning process, which we're about 12 months into that 18-month planning process with the goal of adopting a new plan through the end of the year. But we do have some feedback that we've received through the over 5,000 points of input we've had with various surveys and things like that. I'll talk a little bit about some existing conditions, the recommended revisions to the sidewalk policy that came out of the ESB initially were reviewed by municipal staff and the solicitor. And then next steps, kind of depending on where the commission wants to go. We have some recommendations from staff, but at the end of the day, it's the commission's decision on a few key decision points. Okay, so on the existing program, the sidewalk expansion policy, there's kind of 4 key points to it. So there's an initial petition which requires 75% of the property owners in the affected area or block to sign, and then goes to a staff review of the police chief and municipal manager, who can then authorize an engineering study. And after that's completed, you need 100% of the property owners to agree to the actual installation of sidewalks. There are some issues that we've seen with the current policy. The threshold of meeting the 75% initial requirement has been difficult for residents to meet. I know both Greg and I have fielded phone calls from people throughout the community that have tried to get this moving, but haven't been able to get to that 75% threshold to even start the process. And then the 100% number for the cost sharing and maintenance agreement in Phil Weiss's letter that he sent kind of detailed some of the issues that even happened with that. On the North Meadowcroft project that was done under this 2013 policy, but Phil detailed for you some of the issues with that 100% of residents signing the cost sharing agreement. The other issue that we've seen, the current policy and the way it's written is really geared towards the identified safe walking routes to schools. And as Commissioner Flynn has mentioned multiple times in many meetings, that any street within the public right-of-way is a safe walking route because people walk everywhere. So that the policy really shouldn't be geared towards just the identified quote unquote safe walking routes to school, but should look at the entire municipality because people do walk everywhere.
And can I add one thing? The existing policy, that's a decade old, and my understanding has not resulted in its intent, has not been successful in installing sidewalks, right?
North Meadowcroft sidewalks were installed under the 2013
Right.
policies, but
That
that's
one.
the only one that successfully moved the whole way through the process.
Here we are.
Yes. So as I mentioned, the second prong of the ability to install new sidewalks is the statutory ability by ordinance under chapter 15, part 2, sections 201 and 202. So the commission may order sidewalks to be constructed by resolution. The caveat here is that the commission orders the sidewalks as it's written in the code. Commission orders the sidewalks to be put in. The manager then sends notification to the property owners. Property owners have 30 days to construct the sidewalks. If they don't, then the municipality can do it and lien the properties for the construction cost plus 10%. So the way it's written in the code is that the burden of installing the sidewalks, even by ordinance, would fall on the property owners themselves.
And this has happened. Right? We have,
I,
commission has installed sidewalks on Greenhurst, for
On
example.
Greenhurst, they were ordered in by resolution. I cannot tell you who actually made payment for that installation. That I do not know, but I believe that was the example that.
Statutory that we forced it. Thanks.
all right, so I mentioned we've received a lot of resident feedback and interest in walkability, mobility, things like that. So through the various surveys we've done through the comprehensive planning process, 97% of residents indicated that they take walks in their neighborhood. 69% said that they've walked to various community events. 56% in the initial survey that just asked, what do you like most about Mount Lebanon? What's been changed? Mentioned walkability in some respects. I know from reading through the almost 1,000 responses to that, there were a lot of people that said walkability, that kind of both, that walkability was one of their favorite things about Mount Lebanon, but they would also like to see improved walkability. So there was a lot of people that kind of had that both answer of mentioning walkability in both categories. 44% said that what influenced their decision to move to Mount Lebanon was that it was easy to walk and bike. And then 37% when asked which should be a high priority for Mount Lebanon to address over the next decade, answered safe streets for pedestrians and cyclists. That was the second highest answer to that question, behind investments in parks and recreation. So there's fairly significant interest we've seen from residents in walkability and walkability of neighborhoods through the comprehensive planning process over the last year and all the feedback that we've received. Also, one of the cool things that we did for the comp plan process was we had this mapping tool online. We had close to 1,000 total points of input just on this map, and you can kind of see all the little points where people put in about interest in improved walking routes and walkability. Nearly 33% of the comments on the map were related to walking routes. 156 of those, about a little more than half, or a little less than half, specifically mentioned sidewalks. But I'll also note that there was like 6 different categories that you could put on the map, and for one of those 6 categories to get basically a third of the comments is pretty significant interest in walkability. And then you can also see from the map that there's a relatively even distribution throughout the community. So there's not necessarily just one area that residents are focused on. It's a community-wide interest in improved walkability throughout the community. And then finally, when we drilled down the third round of surveying, we were able to ask a very specific question. One of those questions we asked was the kind of rank choice. If people could choose how they wanted to see the municipality make investments in sidewalks. The highest priority one that came out of that survey was building sidewalks where they're missing on busy collector and arterial streets. And then after that, it was relatively close between repairing and maintaining existing sidewalks and providing safe walking paths where they're missing in residential streets. And then further down, providing safe ways to cross busy streets. And then the lowest priority one in the ranked choice was the walking paths on neighborhood greenways. But that's not to say it's not important. It's just when you put 5 choices in front of people and say, rank these 1 to 5, they may be like, well, they're all important, but I have to sort them somehow. So it's not necessarily saying that the last one is not important. It's just that as a ranked choice vote, it ranked much lower consistently than all the other ones. Okay, so let's talk a bit about our existing conditions and our existing sidewalk network throughout the community. So as of right now, approximately 77% of municipal addresses or streets have sidewalks. But there are a variety of different conditions that exist throughout the community. So you can kind of see on the right-hand side here is the overall map in bright green of where sidewalks exist, and so where they don't exist as well. But we have streets with sidewalks adjacent to the curb. We have them sidewalks that are set back from the curb with a tree lawn. There's places where there's gaps in the sidewalk. There's sidewalks that don't meet municipal standards because they were installed by private property owners and not installed, at the time of development. Some streets without sidewalks, there's obviously considerations to be made for topography, right-of-way intrusion, such as private landscaping, retaining walls, other structures that even though our ordinance says there aren't supposed to be any structures within the right-of-way, sometimes there are, as well as existing street trees and other factors, utility poles, things like that that exist, within the right-of-way or in the area where a sidewalk could potentially be constructed. And then when you look at neighborhood scale mobility, I'll talk about this shortly. There are also those considerations for I'll call them greenway connections. Some of them are larger than others, but they do exist throughout the community just because of how some areas of the community are laid out. So this is a picture of Sleepy Hollow Road, just kind of over the top of the hill after you pass Biltmore out of Dormont coming into Mount Lebanon, going down the hill towards Williamsburg Park. And you can see 3 variety of existing conditions here. On the right-hand side of the street, there's a gap that exists between these 2 driveways. So further up the street this way, the sidewalk comes, I'll try and work my mouse here. The sidewalk comes up to the end of this driveway and then stops. And then there's this gap that exists just between these 2 driveways. It's circled in red. In yellow, further down the hill, you see that the sidewalk exists going down against the curb. But on the other, with the street trees behind the sidewalk, but then on the other side of the street, you have the sidewalk set back from the curb with a tree lawn that has, at the very bottom of this blue circle, a street tree that is planted in that tree lawn. So even just in this one street, one picture, 3 different versions of kind of our existing conditions of some of the sidewalks that do exist throughout the community. Additionally, we have sidewalks that have been installed by private property owners that don't meet municipal standards. I won't out this property owner and say where it is, but there are a handful of these throughout the community too, where private property owners either put in some kind of slabs or pavers or something that are not up to our sidewalk standards, but they do exist around. And then we have streets without sidewalks. This is Woodland that had a number of property owners come to the last commission meeting to talk about sidewalk installation and their desire for it. But as you can see over circled in red, not only are there obviously topography issues, you can see by the slopes of the yards coming down to meet the street, but also you have some private landscaping. I went out and took these pictures on trash day, so unintentionally that there's garbage cans in all these pictures, but this just happened to be the day I went out to take them. So you see there's some private landscaping next to the garbage cans at the driveway at the bottom here, and then going further up, there are some structural intrusions within the right of way with a little bollard next to the driveway, as well as a retaining wall. So there's a variety of existing conditions out there in the community that it's not always cut and dry of what is a sidewalk, what isn't a sidewalk. And sometimes even when there's sidewalks on the map, or you might think there's a sidewalk, it may not be up to standards, or there may be breaks in it. Yes,
So
sir.
question, when you were talking about like the 77%,
Yes,
taking your picture of 3 different types,
yes,
that I would think that circled in blue and that circled in yellow, they're both acceptable. I mean,
Yes.
so that counts towards that 77% of,
yes,
it's a sidewalk as opposed to over grass.
yes,
Okay.
yes, that is correct. Okay, One other existing condition that I'll mention of neighborhood greenways. I know this one because it's in my neighborhood. So this is once again the end of Sleepy Hollow Road, sort of the little break in it that happens. So there is this gap that Sleepy Hollow comes up the hill past Brafferton Drive and then makes a turn onto Richland. The public right of way does actually go through here. And so this is a picture looking from Sleepy Hollow and Richland's over here to the right. But as you can see, there is a little like walking path that kind of goes around these trees. And there are people that do use that walking path to kind of get through here to the other end of Sleepy Hollow in both directions because Williamsburg Park's down at the bottom of the hill, kind of where my mouse is going off the top of Sleepy Hollow there. And then there's other, routes to take continuing through here. So as I mentioned earlier, when asked to prioritize these kind of connections were the sort of bottom of the list of priorities of that people responded to the comp plan, but they are conditions that exist not only in my personal neighborhood, but throughout the community as well. That there are these greenway gaps that could potentially, when you start to think about neighborhood scale mobility, potentially provide connection through certain areas of the community. I know there's a little walkway, I think up on Foxland that people use to get up to the school, up to Jefferson School.
There's a couple by Jefferson that are key walking routes for
Right.
kids. There are stairs that connect. Jefferson
Foster has
all the
one
way
that
to
runs
Park
all the
Place.
way
There's
through.
a way to get down to Beverly, and then there's one on Scrubgrass that you only know if you
Right.
live there. You won't see it, but
Yes, so we do have these greenway
yes.
connections that help our neighborhood mobility. So I think if we're thinking on a neighborhood level scale there, we're thinking about.
Oh, yeah.
So talking about the policy revisions, the overall goal that the ESB had when they started this, and I should say, the ESB started it and Sean Battis was one of the key drivers of it. Sean is now on the traffic board, so he has switched boards, but I don't want him to be forgotten if we're completely saying the ESB, but he was on the ESB when this started. So a lot of the work was done at the ESB level. The overall goal was to make it easier for residents and property owners to enter the process and request an analysis for expansion of the sidewalk network. One of the key goals that staff has come to as we work through the thinking of this is that we feel it's very important to think about this on a neighborhood scale, or at least a block by block scale. Because if you have an individual property owner that says, I want a sidewalk, and you have a policy that says if one property owner says they want a sidewalk, they can install it in front of their property. You're not thinking on a neighborhood scale, and you might have a sidewalk further down the street that is up against the curb. But if that one resident puts theirs set back from the curb with a tree lawn, if you eventually build those towards connections, then you're gonna have offset sidewalks, or you're gonna have to connect them somehow. Or you may have other existing conditions further down the street that would make sense to, where do you want the sidewalk to go? Do you want it against the curb? Do you want it set back? Do you want it, what, other considerations are there for topography and things like that? So we as staff, building on the ESB's recommendation, making it easier, feel it is very important when we think about sidewalk expansion and sidewalk installation to consider it at a block by block scale or at a neighborhood scale. To look at the whole street, not just an individual property. Like a sidewalk on the whole street would benefit everyone rather than trying to have a piecemeal approach of saying, you property owner want one, so you get one, but your neighbor doesn't, so they're not. Like we need to think about it holistically, it's the whole area. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Does our standards say that we have a tree lawn and then the sidewalk is at the current standard? If we're putting in, let's say you're just putting in new sidewalks in a new development, take it out of the,
Yes.
right?
In a brand new development, yes.
There's a tree lawn
There's
and
a
then the
tree lawn,
sidewalk,
and then the
which I would
sidewalk.
maintain is not only safer, but it's more pleasing when you're walking, not to be right next to the cartway.
As long as you provide an adequate width of that tree lawn.
Yes, yeah,
Which is the issue that we have in certain areas of this community currently, where you've got a tree lawn area that's not sufficient to support really a street tree. And
Sure.
that causes then tree roots to raise the slabs. But I also wanted to clarify, when you were talking about looking at an entire street, would it be more accurate to say, looking at the street, at least from a intersection
Corner
to
to
intersection?
Yes.
Block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
block long.
Because
not
it's a
whole.
very long street, so we're not talking one end to the other, we're talking intersection to intersection.
Right, in Woodland, I would say would make sense to have a plan for the best way to address the whole street. Now, as far as installation goes, you could do installation on a block, if hypothetically, and I'll talk more about Woodland a little bit later. But if hypothetically you put the sidewalk on the low side of the street where there are
Yeah.
more cross streets that intersect with it, because on the high side of the
Yeah.
street, there's only two intersecting streets.
But it has a steeper slope on the high side.
Yes, so if you looked at the street and said, okay, the low side makes more sense from a topography standpoint, from a installation standpoint. Then potentially you could say, you being the commission could say, okay, we want to put these numbers in the capital improvement plan, we'll consider funding them. The overall installation plan may wind up being a, let's say, 5-year plan and do, one section, intersection to intersection, that I think had like 4 houses and then 3 houses and then 4 houses. It's just that's how many are between those intersections on the low side, rather than doing, 20 houses in a row on the high side. So the commission could make that decision, and I'll get to some recommendations on that in a little bit. But yes, when I'm saying neighborhood level, I mean intersection to intersection of block levels. Yeah.
Right now, without any policy changes, if a resident wants to put a sidewalk in front of their property and wants to pay for the whole thing, are they allowed to do that?
Yes, they just need a permit through building inspection.
Okay, it's just, we're just talking about the cost sharing and the municipality
Yeah.
contributing. to
Does the permit make them do it according to the standard with the tree line?
According to municipal specs.
Okay, good.
Okay,
I will, okay.
yeah.
You may be gonna say, go ahead, I'll let you-
Meadowcroft?
you're probably gonna say the same thing that I am.
I was gonna say that I will note that the one sidewalk that was installed under the current policy on North Meadowcroft was installed at the curb and not with the tree line, because when they looked at it, it fit better on the street to do it at the
Yeah,
curb.
sure.
So one of my recommendations, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but would be to have the municipal engineer do a type, size, and location
Right.
study
Yeah.
on certain streets.
Yeah.
To determine where the best location, whether it's, with the tree line set back from the curb, whether it's at the curb, and some things like topography. may,
Sure, makes a big
dictate that.
difference, yeah.
Or existing street trees, things like that. Because the other thing is, we don't want to go in and, take down good, healthy street trees to install sidewalks. But in some areas, it may make sense to have a plan in place for sidewalk expansion, so that when street trees are replaced over time at the end of their useful life, we're not taking down good trees, it's, trees do
Sure.
die, and so at the end of their life, having a plan for that area. So a street like Country Club comes to mind, that you have a lot of very
Yeah.
large, old, mature, beautiful trees there.
Yep.
We're not gonna go in and cut those all down. But at some point, those trees will reach the end of their useful life, and having a plan for what do we want this street to look like in the future would make sense. Do you want, because when you remove the trees would be a time to think about sidewalks, but not now. We're not removing the trees on Country Club. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not proposing removing the trees on Country Club.
Thank you for that important clarification.
Yes.
Underline. To the point that Keith had answered a question, which was current policy is if someone requests a sidewalk, code says it has to be done a certain way. Do we want to change that so that, we get back to encouraging people for the sidewalks, so it says, I want to do it, but I don't want to take out these trees. Can I put the sidewalk along the curb rather than putting it on the other side of the trees? Essentially, yes, we want you to put a sidewalk. What is the way? What's the better way to encourage it as far as, I don't have to put a retaining wall if I put it along the street as opposed to have to put it further in. So right now we have a requirement that it has to be a certain way. We give the owner more latitude for methods to install, and the commission has a strong feeling about that.
I
So-
have a strong feeling about it, of course, strong feeling about everything.
We have a recommendation though. right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I have some recommendations within the
Yeah.
policy itself to address that.
Okay.
That we're covered.
Yeah. That doesn't cover if one property owner wants to put a sidewalk in just on their property.
That
case.
needs addressing.
But
Yeah.
I think I have some recommendations within the policy to cover some.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the policy first, and then if we get that in a good place, we could potentially talk about that side of things. So the recommendations that the ESB and staff have for the policy revisions. There can be split into two categories, petition requirement changes. So the ESB's recommendation was to change the 75% requirement to trigger a study to as low as one property owner. That number is flexible, so I'll just say in our, like, thinking about how studies for, like how the traffic board currently operates for traffic calming. If you want to come to the traffic board and request traffic calming on your street, you need a petition signed by, I think it's 10 residents. To say, hey, we're 10 residents from this street, we're interested in traffic. So if we wanted to mirror that, we could potentially use the 10 number. We could go with the ESB's recommendation of 1. But I think we've seen, anecdotally through the other residents that have reached out to the municipality and tried to work through the process, the 75% number is probably a bit too high to initiate the process. So we're in favor of changing it. We being staff are in favor of changing it. What that number is flexible, but I think we should lower it in some respects. Just to sort of trigger and initiate the process. And then we do have some recommended process changes as well. The request should go to the traffic board now, mobility board after the transition happens next April, instead of to the police chief first. Because really the current policy, the way it's written, that's some of that safe walking routes to school, is that it goes to the police chief and the police chief cross-references the safe walking routes map to see if it is on a safe walking route, and then that kind of dictates where it goes from there. So it's to kind of more mirror the process that traffic calming currently uses. Is really how we kind of structure these process changes. That it would go to the traffic board first, so that places less value on those safe walking routes and more value placed on proximity to community destinations. And there's a whole list of, what those community destinations are, rather than just looking at the safe walking routes to school. And then also a process change that, because there is a cost sharing formula currently written in the process, the ESB did not recommend changing that cost sharing formula. The only change they recommended was rather than having residents pay up front, they could have the option to utilize a 3-year payment plan with the municipality. And the other thing I will mention is that we don't care how the money is raised. So like,
One
if
person can pay for it all.
one person wanted to pay for the whole street, that's fine by us.
Mhm.
Individual
Sure.
property owner, in the end, as Phil Weiss noted in his memo, we will need them to sign off. We will need them to make an agreement with us for the actual installation at the end. But if there's a property owner that is on hard financial times and can't come up with the money, and their neighbors want to chip in and pay for their portion, that's fine by us. We don't care who pays for it. It's just there's, options once the formula is worked through. This is the municipal cost share, this is the residents' cost share.
Okay.
On this page, I'm in favor of these policy revisions. You just have to specify what that number is for the petition change.
And that's my concern of it, something closer to the traffic calming. There's just a certain, to go through this time, energy to do the analysis.
There is a little bit of balance in the sense that I think you need more than one.
Right.
Because having 5, 10 encourages conversation between neighbors, right? Because you will have certain neighbors that may say, hey, look, I don't want a sidewalk.
Mhm.
So the earlier you can sort of get a feel for that and start
Yeah.
talking to your neighbors.
So
So
that and also just what the mobility board and traffic board is being asked to do to analyze whether they're
Takes
using
work.
gateway or whatever
Yeah.
takes work. Let's have a certain number of people that want to do this before the group has threshold before the group has to do the work.
I was thinking
The other-
5, but I'd be okay with 10, just if we want to start that
The other
conversation.
option I'll throw out there, since we talked about Woodland. Is that maybe you have both a number or a percent. So like, let's say on Woodland, on that low side of the street where there's those intersecting streets, right? There's one section where there's only 3 homes between 2 blocks. If those 3 property owners wanted, a sidewalk just in their little intersection to intersection portion, they wouldn't be able to get 5 to trigger
You're
the
right.
process because there's only 3 houses there.
Right.
So maybe you say 33% or
Sure.
5, or 25% or 10, or
Yeah.
maybe I had this one, probably
25% or 5.
or 5, something like that, yes.
A percent per street segment. Because unless you get along the street, so I've got, you know, one person in this block, one person in that block, one person in that block, as opposed to the street segments, and to your point, the street segment may be only 3 houses. Or the street segment may be more, but that way, because in the end, back to block, if that particular street segment is interested in pursuing this, they've got enough people in that segment who want to do it, right? You know, so that's back to the min including some sort of percentage
Well,
of that
that-
street,
that-
no, the percentage of that street segment, so we say it's. I don't know, I'm trying to think from we do traffic plumbing, is it what, 25% of the street segment or something, I mean, I don't remember.
I think it's 10, you need 10 signatures on a petition.
But
if I
it's
recall
10
correctly.
out of 20 houses or something, I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember.
Because again, back to even traffic calming, it's gotta be a segment of the street. So just trying to give them an opportunity. I think a street as long as Kelso, where it gets so long, you know, the impact of, if some people are interested, maybe spread out. Whereas if they're more targeted on a segment, it's more likely to get a yes, or, you know, people
I
interested.
am comfortable with letting staff come back with a recommendation on that.
Can I make a counter to this, just as a thought exercise?
Yeah.
If nothing else. If someone says, I want a sidewalk. One, they could just go do it.
They just paid for it.
They just pay for it. That's one approach. But they could say, I want a sidewalk and I want to submit to be in this list. And for argument's sake, it goes to the mobility board, and the mobility board basically looks at it and says, okay, they're on this type of street, you know. Yeah, and there's nothing really much to do at that stage except say, okay, they're on the list. And they stay on the list because we're doing sidewalk repair on the other side of town for the next 5 years. They can stay on the list. They've said, I want a sidewalk. They can stay on the list. There's no harm with that. We're not prioritizing them. But they're on the list and they're recognized as they are interested in having a sidewalk on their property. Right? That's a very simple exercise. If the next property, hang on, if the next property or 2 doors down says, I want a sidewalk too, or the third one or fourth, yeah, all right, people can go, hey, we submitted, you should submit too, right? Maybe we'll get prioritized, right? As opposed to just saying, you guys have to go do all of this before we'll even take your information. We're basically giving them a mechanism to come to the table and say, we are interested. When you are there in the neighborhood repairing sidewalks or whatever it is, right, that's going on with sidewalks, if that's just that one, one neighbor who doesn't have that sidewalk, and they're like, yeah, I'd like one when you get to us. Right? Great. 5 years from now, when we're there redoing your sidewalks, we're going to add yours too. I'm not saying I'm prioritizing it. I'm just saying it's a cue to let them into the process as opposed to holding everybody off and saying, you can't do it until you reach some threshold. Okay, here, we got you on the list. And that way we can be tracking who is interested in actually having it done on their property. So that when there is a threshold, we can say, hey, y'all residents, you've all expressed an interest. This is coming, right? You might want to talk to your neighbors or whatever that exercise might is. I'm just saying, flip the script a little bit instead of, pushing it up, pushing everybody off until a certain stage, saying, we'll take your information. We can't commit to anything until, right, we go through, our annual sidewalk process, which we do every year anyway. That keeps people engaged more, gives people a mechanism to submit their information rather than just pushing them off and saying you have to reach some threshold, which, how many different ways can we approach that, right? That's confusing. People don't want to go figure that out. Just, we've got your information, you're on the list. And we see you on the map, we have a GIS, we can put a little red dot, right? And then they're there.
I like that, but then we have this 10-year backlog for sidewalk maintenance, and that's gonna be frustrating for those residents. They're not even gonna live there anymore.
That's a funding discussion, right? That's a budget
It'll bring
discussion.
it up.
It always comes back to, it's a budget discussion, and we can always say, you can always go install a sidewalk yourself. If you want to be in the queue, right? This is typically what we budget each year. This is what it, again, it goes back to how do we prioritize? Well, that's a budget question. It's not a, hey, I want or don't want, or we are trying to create some thresholds to do it. I'm not going to assess their property. I'm not going to look at it until we are in that area and it's time to go think about it. But I know you're on the list.
So you're saying basically, this has kind of a tripwire saying, once X number of people have requested a study, the study that's requested, you're saying, well, don't put your name on the list. Then how does it work of saying, when X number of people on the list are on that street, then that then generates.
Well, we might,
That's what
well,
it's
that- for me, creating additional priority for, areas that have a large concentration, then we might bump them up on the construction list. But if there's only one, I'm not gonna spend a lot of effort on it, because again, I'm not gonna go do a study on it. I'm not going, but if our sidewalk repair crews are in the area, or we're planning to be in that area anyway, I might bring that location in, because we're there anyway, right?
I'm just trying to figure out how to blend your very good idea with still needing thresholds or whatever to say. One is to say, here's an online sign up list. But someone has to look and say, oh, hey, we now have 5 people on that street, or 10, or whatever the threshold is
Well-
established to be. Kind of thing, which is one that generates a study, as opposed to, hey, we got your name on the list, so if it turns out we're going into that neighborhood, putting sidewalks, we'll contact you. It feels like 2 different goals.
I don't think it works well. I mean, it might work on a local street or a cul-de-sac dead end, but if you think about Woodland, Woodland is a collector street. And so once again, it's not just the people on Woodland, who, whether they want a sidewalk or not. It's the people who live on Eisenhower. It's the people that live on Ridgeway or Ridgefield, whatever, I get them all mixed up. That also walk, that have to be considered, because really, it's a very unsafe street where the cars just go so fast, it's mind blowing. And it comes a point to me where we really have to be thinking about safety. And, the whole community ought to be voting on how we get those sidewalks put in. And you identified 5 streets. Kelso is another one. My God. Can you imagine having kids if you lived on Kelso, you'd have to drive them everywhere. You couldn't let them out of the house.
Well, I think that's kind of the third mechanism, right there. So that's the statutory approach. But I think there's place for, all 3 of these, right? Because some statutory, some roads are not going to rise to the statutory level.
They aren't.
Commission will never force that through. Some streets, it's a no-brainer. We should just be doing it. But those streets in that gray area, I think, is that, how do we make this as easy for people to engage in a process and be recognized? Knowing that I might not, because I think from an internal perspective, it's a prioritization question, right? It's a capacity question, it's a budget question, right? There's a lot of mechanics that we've got to deal with. I instead of pushing people off until they reach a threshold, I'm kind of just saying, potentially flip the script and say, just put you in the queue. We can't commit to anything. We have a sidewalk program that, this is how it works, right? And again, we prioritize based upon that approach as opposed to pushing out.
So
So in
we
the
still
interest
have the
of time,
petition, yeah.
because I can be quite verbose and I'm not even going through my slides. I think I'll say, I want to give this some more thought, because I feel pretty strongly about having a plan for a whole block or street segment or neighborhood or whatever we want to call it. That if we do, I don't want to completely discount Commissioner Flynn's idea, but I am very wary of recommending anything that does things piecemeal just because I'm the planner. I want to have a plan for the whole street, and what I don't want is, someone on, one end of Woodland. I'm just using that because it's been brought up a lot, but one end of Woodland to put a sidewalk in and say, oh, well, my property is pretty flat by the street, but then it drops off. If I put this tree lawn in, I'm gonna have to put in a retaining wall to hold up the sidewalk, but that's the standard. But I want to put it in right next to the curb. And then someone, on the same block, let's say this is the high side now that we're talking about, because there is more topography issues there. Someone 10 houses down, still in the same block of street segment, putting theirs in that has a flatter slope, putting theirs in 5 feet back from the curb.
Right.
And then you have offset sidewalks. So I would rather have a plan for the whole block and say, this is where the engineer says the sidewalk should go, whether it's at the curb, whether it's set back from the curb. This is where the street tree should go, whether it's in the tree lawn, whether it's, if the sidewalk's at the curb, the street tree should be behind it. As the planner, I would much rather have a plan for the whole street so that you don't have this patchwork looking, and then have to do these jogs of angling the sidewalks together, or even have someone's driveway where, you know, the sidewalk comes into your driveway at one point and then you have to zigzag through someone's driveway to another.
Yeah, there's the simple answer to this. Just tunnel under Woodland, put all the cars underneath.
Yeah.
And the street's public space. You can walk, rollerblade, whatever you want. Big dig in Mount Lebanon. Let's go.
All right, so this slide has a lot of text on it. I'm not gonna read it all. It kind of shows the differences
Yeah.
from the current process to what we're proposing for
Like the
process
slide though.
recommendations.
Yeah,
That, you know, and we did this new process to kind of mirror the process for neighborhood traffic calming that I've mentioned. So the petition of property owners would go to the traffic board, currently mobility board after, you know, April first. And then the traffic board can request the manager to authorize an engineering study, which is just how it happens now with the traffic calming. And the traffic board or mobility board would keep a running list of the requests, the study results, the street scores, all that stuff. And then my vision would be that they would submit that list annually to the commission. Just like you get a list from the Parks Advisory Board now, of their parks priority projects that comes with the capital improvement plan. Same thing from the mobility board, that you would get a list of, you know, here's the list of requested sidewalks and their associated costs and our identified priorities for them. But it's coming from the board level as a recommendation into the CIP. Then the engineering study, I mentioned that type size location analysis. In the interest of time, I'll just call it a TSL analysis. So then that would also provide cost estimates for installation. We can work out the cost sharing formula there. And then the engineer can present those recommendations to the commission. Like we've done with the traffic calming, you've had, you know, the traffic engineer come in and say, these are our recommendations, this is how much it would cost, here's a couple options for you. And then the commission would have the option to either authorize the manager to start working through those resident agreements that the solicitor mentioned in his memo, or can defer the project to the capital improvement plan if the commission doesn't want to spend unassigned funds on it. You could say, okay, thanks for the presentation and the cost. You know, we will discuss this further with the CIP projects when we get the mobility board's list of, you know, recommended projects, just like you get now from the sports board, the parks board, all that stuff. Yes.
comments on the slide?
Yeah, well, I had a question, yeah, I had a question too. What, for the board review of street scores and so forth, you have.
Yeah.
Who helps that board collect this data? I mean, is that with Public Works, the GIS to say number of completed sidewalks and the location to the nearest
Public facility.
public facility? You know, is there a plan that they have the resources on that board to get this information?
Yeah, I would say that would come through the engineering study as well. So I think that would come through the engineering study as well. Because the engineers have access to all of our GIS stuff, so you could pretty easily map out, you know, where's the closest park, where's the closest school, what are the other, you know, public destination things.
Well, then how the scoring?
Mhm.
I guess the scoring goes to the engineer scores and it goes back to mobility just to keep track of the scores.
Yes, and the scores were designed through the 1993 sidewalk assessment program that was done. And the scores were really to help prioritize the list of sidewalks. So if you had a list of 10 potential petitions of places that wanted sidewalks, the scores were really to just say, this one has a higher score, so it should be higher on the priority list than this one. Not saying the lower one isn't also important, but just to kind of help organize the list. The scores don't factor into the cost sharing formula. The scores don't, the scores are really just there to kind of help order the list in a mathematical and somewhat quantitative fashion.
That part I got, I just, is more, is the, who does the homework?
Yeah, I would say it's the engineer probably in, yeah, the engineer mostly.
Now, so like the traffic board, currently with this question, we say Gateway, go do the analysis, come back to the next meeting.
Yep.
Similar sort of thing, the study, then come back to the next meeting.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So, yeah, so I like the process. I love the way you outlined it. I don't think we're gonna get to 100% of the property owners, and I understand Phil's memo on that, so I want to propose an alternate. If we get to most of the property owners, let it be somewhere where that's commission approval to authorize it anyway, and we just skip those couple homeowners that aren't interested right now. What'll happen is pedestrians are gonna walk through their yard anyway, like maybe they already are.
Just like the sidewalk gap picture we had.
Exactly, and it'll be better than we have now, and one day they'll come around.
So I will say that leads me to the next point, which is that this is, I'll say this is the carrot that we have, right?
Right,
This is the municipality working with residents, sharing the cost of putting something in. As I mentioned earlier, the commission has statutory power to order sidewalks in and force the residents to pay for it. So if there are property owners that don't agree, nothing in this policy abridges the commission's ability to say, we have 90% of the property owners,
You're
we're
gonna,
gonna order the other ones in and you're gonna have to pay for it.
tough Cheetos.
So the commission still has that ability, the stick of the ordinance ability. This is the carrot. This is to say, hey, work with us and we'll share the cost with you. You still have the stick in your back pocket.
I would still want to get the lawyers just to say, to your point, if it's 90% rather than 100, are we exposed legally in some way, shape or form? So I just want to follow up with Phil at some point to go, is maybe exec session kind of discussions, we're getting legal advice. To say, what are the legal issues here? So, I mean, I think right now Ian's looking for some feedback from us. That's a piece of feedback, so we get, some more detail, like the next exec saying, hey, Phil, you wrote a memo, we've got some more questions. That kind of thing.
Okay.
All right. Okay, and then we talked briefly about the road scoring formula that was developed through the 93 sidewalk task force. There were some slight revisions to just the calculations recommended by ESB and staff. So really we boiled it down to four components of the formula: road type, posted speed, post-project sidewalk completion. So obviously if your project, say, completes some gaps or does a whole block, then scoring 100% there is much better and will help you. And then the public facility distance factor. So this is moving away from the safe walking routes to schools and moving towards the idea that we've talked a lot about through the comp plan process, about mobility really being focused on origins and destinations and what are the common destinations in our communities. And these are the ones that have risen to the top, both through our public feedback process and just anecdotally the ones that we know are the places that people go to, through in the community. All right, so then that brings me to, I mentioned the TSL analysis that the engineer can do. So one thing that I'll say about the TSL analysis, being it's part of the recommended policy revisions. That if a street makes petition to the traffic board reviews the petition and says, okay, we want to recommend that the manager, because obviously boards cannot authorize expenditures, only the manager can, or commission. But the manager, the board could say, okay, we would like this analysis done. They contact the manager says, okay, we'll have this TSL analysis done on this street. That being said, we as municipal staff, through our knowledge of the community, said, there are some streets like Woodland, like Sleepy Hollow, a couple others, that if the commission has any interest in utilizing their powers by ordinance to order sidewalks in, or to, start the process of thinking about sidewalk, maybe not order them in, but start the process of thinking about sidewalks in these areas. Identified, I believe it was 6 streets to potentially do this TSL analysis on. There was a memo from Dan Dizeroth in your packets on what the cost of that TSL analysis would be.
18,000.
Being the planner, I would recommend doing the analysis before we would move forward with any sidewalk construction on any of these streets. And that 18,000 cost estimate was based on the identified streets, but if the commission wants to do fewer streets, the number might go down. If the commission wants to add more streets, the number would go up. You get the idea. But we do recommend, municipal staff recommends the commission authorizing the engineer to do the TSL analysis on, the cost. Okay, and the TSL analysis, I'll also say, in the context of the process, would then provide the cost estimate for construction and cost sharing formula of the property.
This analysis, is it sidewalk, one side of the street, both sides of the street, what does it analyze essentially both
Yes.
scenarios?
It would analyze both sides of the street and say, my vision would be analyze both sides of the street and say which side is better for the sidewalk.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So in a street like Woodland, where there might be topography issues on one side of the street versus the other, might say, oh, this side of the street is much flatter. So it would be better on this side of the street versus the other one. So as staff, these were the 6 streets that we identified for the first pass at a study, just to say, hey, we have a plan for installation on these streets. If folks on these streets want to use the carrot and work with us and work through the policy and have a cost sharing formula, then, you know, we can go that route. Or if the commission feels that these streets are important enough to have sidewalks and wants to order them in by ordinance, then the commission could consider doing that as well. Or sorry, no, or order them in by resolution. Sorry, key difference there. Or ordinance versus resolution. At any rate, so Greenhurst, Kelso, Lakemont, Sleepy Hollow, Rob Hollow, Woodland. I will note, I listed these in alphabetical order, not in order of priority,
Right.
specifically listing them alphabetically. That was an intentional twist. on my part. So just to talk about a couple of them quickly, because I know I'm getting short on time. So the section of
Greenhurst.
High Greenhurst.
Schoolers walk every day in
Yeah.
the dark in the winter. They're on the street because there's snow and I almost hit them. I'm terrified.
So the reds, the reds are.
One, running short on time, and 2, that, look, I don't know if, I mean, I'm not sure to the point of deciding, do we do by resolution or whatever, what have you. I'd like to know what the cost of this exercise is.
$18,000.
So I'd like to spend the 18,000.
I would too.
100%.
Way to the analysis.
Yes.
Love it.
So
do
you
it.
got 3 votes for that. Maybe there's.
Andrew, Are we voting for the 18,000 to do it?
All right, so you have 4 votes for that.
Okay.
Come back and give us
So-
your info.
All right, so I
don't.
I don't need to walk through them all, but there is this information. I'll just put each one up quickly. This one's Kelso.
People are waiting. Thank you.
Yes, I know. I'm just gonna put this up in case people come back and watch this presentation
Yeah.
later. Online, since this is, so they know what segments we're proposing. So the red lines on these maps are where there's sidewalks currently. So we'd be looking at, you know, filling in the gaps in these. Lakemont Drive, so there's actually 2 portions of Lakemont that are sidewalkless. The portion from like the Greenhurst Bower Hill area winding down. And then the bottom section as well, between Raleigh and almost up to Glades, basically. Sleepy Hollow, there's that one sidewalk gap that I identified between the Dormont border and where it makes the break in the Greenway. But then after the Greenway, basically from Highview all the way down to just before Briarwood, there's no sidewalks there as well. Rob Hollow, there's just a couple little gaps in Rob Hollow, mostly between like Sylvandale and Craigview is right here, yeah. So the Sylvandale and Craigview is really like driftwood. So you can see there's a sidewalk on this side of the street that comes up and stops at Craigview. And then it picks up again after driftwood, but also on the high side where Craigview comes down is Sylvandale all the way, basically down past Craigview. But yes, so there's that gap in Rob Hollow. And then Woodland, which we've talked about a lot. That, you know, from basically from basically Terrace, all the way up until Vermont, where Foster Elementary, right? So, and like we said, there are these places on the low side of the street where, you know, there's 4 houses here, there's 3 houses here, there's 4 houses here. So if we decide, if the TSL analysis said to do Woodland on the low side of the street, then, you know, perhaps it could be done in a block by block, 4 homes, 3 homes, 4 homes, rather than you know, like I said, that's why we want to do the TSL analysis, because which side of the street does it go on? What's in the way? Where does it go? Does it go against the curb? Does it go setback? What's the cost of installation? All that other stuff.
If we did on the low side, we could raise all the crosswalks from the high side to the low side to traffic calm too.
There's,
Can we
yes.
kind of reach the end of this and get to the next?
All right.
on our agenda?
Right, so yes, so wrapping up commission decision points, you've already authorized the engineering study, so that takes care of the second one.
When do we expect to get that back? Is that gonna be a this year thing?
Well, let me talk to the engineer.
That's what everybody said.
And here's a question from the manager.
since you've all agreed to authorize that tonight, do you want that reflected in our one and only meeting in July and discussion? We will cover the available funds conversation that we referenced in an earlier. Do you want that reflected as already being approved? So that will. come
Yes.
off of
Yes.
that?
I would reflect this already being approved. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
we
gonna
take it off.
spend it.
Sure.
Just take it off the table.
Yes, you can take it from that bucket.
Clarification. No, no, I thank you for
All
asking.
right, yeah.
And then on the policy amendments piece, the next step to amending the policy would be to vote on the policy amendments at a meeting. I know we have a couple requests to just make amendments on the
Number of residents required
number
for
of
petition.
residents required, and then Commissioner Flynn's points. So I guess the question on that is, does the commission need this to come back to another discussion session, or do you just want staff recommendations and then put it on for vote?
Well,
Can we write a memo?
I'd like to hear from the solicitor the next exec, but I would certainly also like to see you as you edit it.
Yeah.
whatever else. So maybe just write
Right.
something up and we'll talk at the next meeting, then we give you some better direction.
So, okay, got
I
it.
expect we'll get public feedback on it.
Oh, yeah, I think we're gonna want to get public feedback on it.
Could you also add what happens if 100% of residents don't agree, like what the options are, put that in policy? So it's really clear to future commissions, there's lots of options.
Well, I think at least to put that in, so when Phil says, what's his homework?
Yeah.
Let's address that question.
Okay, all right,
All
great.
right.
So next step, engineer will conduct the study and we'll come back to a future discussion session for further direction.
Just add
Couple
it.
of points, quick one, quick discussion.
Yes, so I think we already covered the questions in discussion. But we couldn't pass up using this beautiful picture for our public information office. So thank you all for your time today.
What street is that?
That's, no, we're just constructing that now, right?
That is Jefferson.
No, it's, Flint Ridge.
Flintridge, okay.
Flint Ridge.
That's good.
I know that
Yep.
wall.
Yeah,
That's
that's right.
private wall Flint Ridge. That was my guess. It was my word Flint Ridge, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
That was what I was gonna guess it was.
All right,
Great.
good. Thank you both. Appreciate, with Eden Great for coming up. Next on the list, let's discuss
You guys did great.
low carbon paving. So we've got some folks from Gateway to, talk about low carbon paving. You talk about being very wonky, where at least I'm fascinated to hear what you guys have to say, so. We're kind of drawing straws here to see who comes up.
Oh, it's me.
Okay. You guys are on a short straw, isn't it?
No, I like to talk.
You open the Zoom meeting link?
Represent from Lindy Paving. Chris Paul. Sure, great.
Yeah.
Here's like open the wrong one.
Apologize, my first time here is,
Good.
All right, good stuff. All right, well, we got the sound back. Thank you for the delay. And we have the folks from Gateway and Lindsay Paving to talk about low carbon paving, so. We have a lot less time, we've got maybe 15 minutes to do your whole hour-long presentation.
okay, great.
There'll be an extra time to look at it. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Well, I can talk fast, so that's great. Introduction, I'm Dave Heath with Gateway Engineers. I have, with Jason Robeson, with Lindy Paving. Partner in this presentation, also partner here, you're looking at the screen, this is, PAPA, which is the Pennsylvania Asphalt Pavement Association. We've been working with them over the last 6 to 8 months, to develop something that we can get out and get information out, to the area, to the community in large. So, I'm not gonna read through the slides, I'm gonna jump forward, try to hit some of the main points. So why am I here tonight? I'm gonna give you some information on the Buy Clean initiative. That is the federal government's, plan to combat, global warming via construction materials. And then we're gonna talk about, RAP, which is recycled asphalt, pavement, and then the performance of that, because sometimes, depending on who you talk to, RAP might get a bad name, but,
Bad rap, shall we say.
that's correct. So the Buy Clean initiative, there's 4 construction materials that the federal government's sort of money behind. You see there concrete, steel, flat glass and asphalt. Okay, really what we're trying to do with this program is to lower the embodied greenhouse gas emissions. So what is embodied carbon emissions? It's essentially the carbon that's created via the extraction and transport and the implementation of a product or any type of material. So this kind of just illustrates what that actually means. So embodied is taking it from the quarry, trucking it, putting it through the plant, and then putting it down. For this presentation, we're going to speak directly about RAP. So we can skip through this and already went over that. So here's some of the information about federal government. So the IIJA and the IRA both have initiatives in it to fund programs associated with these for construction materials. This is coordinated across 17 of the federal government agencies. NDOT has a statement and is starting to be involved. They're one of the, go to the next slide. It's one of the, you'll see in a slide here in the future that Pennsylvania's identified this as something that they're moving towards. So not only at the federal level, but also the state level. So right here, we're talking about what they're going to be measuring. So the environmental product declarations, or EPDs, that's what you're going to have to specify to make sure that the product that you are using meets the standards of the act and the potential grant opportunities. A little bit down there, so at least 20% of your asphalt mixes are RAP. It uses warm mix technology, and I don't, it's maybe a little bit more technical. And you don't use any of the non-pavement recycled content, roof shingles, rubber, other things other than asphalt. Yep. So with that, and Jason can talk a little bit more about this, is there's efficiencies at the plant by using material that contractors are bringing in, getting it certified, and then reusing it in the mixes. And then another big thing here, just from an environmental perspective, you're lowering your greenhouse gases by not having to truck and do all the quarries, the explosions, the grading, because it's already coming back somewhat at grade. And then there's several plants that are already suited to get the material back to specifications. So FEMA, this you can see when this was enacted, are now requiring all these materials to receive their funds. So anytime you see that FEMA declaration out, and the fixes that are associated with those catastrophes, they're using these products. Okay. So this is basically, or getting back to what I had mentioned earlier, the federal Buy Clean partnership. You can see that Pennsylvania there is in orange. They're an alliance member, but they have not enacted legislature to have this Buy Clean at a state level. So getting back to the EPDs. So the industry is now going to have to certify their product. This EPD is a certification that allows the material to be used. So a specific example, Lindy has been going through and using their materials and getting these EPDs in advance of this really becoming mainstream. So they're getting set up for when this happens in getting all these certifications. So very much like the nutrition labels, you're going to have a very similar aspect related to construction materials. You can see it is generally around environmental protection credits or things that they're following for global warming. So then with the I'm referencing Papa here, so this is Napa. It's a nationwide asphalt pavement association, which has really led the part of the Buy Clean and the IIJA and the IRA. They've been integral in creating that, the legislature part of that would allow for these products to be used. And so then just a couple key takeaways. It's really just going down through and telling you what you're gonna have to, what's coming down the line in terms of industry trends. So then it was at that point, I'm gonna just pass it over to a partner here, finish up the rest of it.
Well, thank you all. My name is Jason Robinson. I'm a Director of Business Development for Lindy Paving. Been in the industry for 20+ years. And some of the reasons Lindy's behind some of this initiatives is we believe in the high RAP and low carbon materials. We've had success with high RAP, low carbon materials in the field and at the lab testings based upon performance evaluation and feedback from all the agencies we work with. We have seen the cost benefits and performance, which we pass on to our customers and our clients. Low carbon materials are the way of the future, the way the federal government is going, as well as states, including PennDOT, the counties, and soon the municipalities. Lindy has taken some initiatives on her own and pursuing the grant money to upgrade our asphalt facilities that don't meet the new carbon federal standards. We've hired an environmental engineer to oversee our efforts to ensure Lindy Paving is meeting or exceeding the new federal standards for high RAP, low carbon asphalt materials at each of our existing plants. We've also hired a federal grant writer to pursue the available funds to upgrade our existing asphalt plants that do not meet those federal guidelines. Under sustainability, we have sustainable asphalt pavement benefits. So we have an economic, a social, and an environmental benefit. We'll briefly touch on the economic side now because I can get into a little bit deeper later. But the low carbon, high recycled asphalt material is more cost effective than conventional materials. And it has similar or comparable testing results based upon field and lab results. On the social side of it, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Not in my backyard. That's more about our location, about where we keep our plants, put them in industrial parks, keeping them away from residential and school areas. On the environmental side, once again, we're reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, reducing strain on our natural resources, which Dave alluded to earlier. We're running warm mix asphalt, which means we typically are running at 280 degrees, where in the past we were running at 330 degrees. So now we're using less fuel, less energy. So that's less of an impact on the resources and minimizing the impact on the ecosystem. So when we're using recycled asphalt, we're no longer taking virgin material and mining out of the ground now. We're recycling that product for milling and putting it back into the mix. So the GHG is the greenhouse gas emission and RAP is RAP, that's recycled asphalt pavement. Sustainability. There are two primary ways to reduce carbon emissions in asphalt pavements. Increasing your RAP and reduce temperatures. Increasing your RAP is the RAP utilization. You know, right now we see a lot of bids are coming out, could be virgin mixes up to 50 or 25%. We could be using state approved mixes or 25 to 50%. They're already approved by PennDOT. Reduced temperatures are just what I talked about with the asphalt plants. We're now making warm mixed material in all of our plants, so reducing our overall temperature and impact on the environment. The road forward for the federal government and what they see as a vision for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And we're currently, Lindy, at all of our plants is using warm mix asphalt at every single one of our plants. Next slide. So here we can get into a little bit of the value of RAP. On the right side kind of illustrates the total cost of laying the material down. So it includes the material cost, the plant production, the trucking, and the lay down. If you look at the material cost, it's roughly 70% of the whole cost. And as we dive down into that a little bit deeper, you have your aggregate, your cost of raw materials. The aggregate's roughly $20 to $25 a ton, which is about 95% of the mix. And then your asphalt binder, which is the glue that holds everything together, is roughly about $600 a liquid ton, and that's 5% of the mix. The benefit of the high RAP reduces the overall cost because it uses less aggregate, and we can recycle the asphalt binder that we pull back out of the millings as well. So the value of RAP on a national level. So on a national level, on the right-hand side, this chart has a lot of numbers on it, so I'll quickly go through it. On the left side is the dollar amounts that we're saving by the RAP percentages. the column going to your right, the 15, 25, 40, 15, 20, or 30, and 15, that's all the wrap percentages. The thickness is the layers, 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch to 2.5 inches. So, for instance, on the 1.5 inches, if you're going at a 15% wrap, you can save $5.30 compared to a virgin mix. If you bump that number up to a 40% wrap, you can save up to $14.12 plus or minus. On the nation, in each state, we're averaging about 21% wrap in our mixes, which is roughly $8 a ton in cost savings. And that's based off of NAPA, which Dave alluded to, that's the National Asphalt Pavement Association. Sustainable pavement wrap mixes. So the performance of wrap mixes, the performance of the pavements containing up to 30% wrap is similar to that pavements constructed from virgin materials with no wrap. That's based upon a Copeland study from 2011, and that called reclaimed asphalt pavement and asphalt mixtures state of the practice. What we see is when recycled asphalt is added responsibly, performance and the wrap mixes can be equivalent to virgin mixes. We find this to be true in the field. We also find this to be true in our labs and our facilities and all of our testing.
How long have you been using this in the field?
Well, I'll get into district level.
Okay.
So we've been using this for quite some time. This has been in the industry since the early 2000s.
Okay.
But District 11 specifically, and I'm going to get into that here pretty soon. Their own maintenance group used a high 90mm wrap in 2012, and District 11 is continuing to use it today. So they've done that for a little over 11 years now, just here in District 11. So it's pretty widely accepted right now. So PennDOT specifications for high wrap mixes for low volume roads. So LVR means low volume roads. And we'll get into Dave, get into the next slide, please. The next one here is going to get into the more specifics. And I'm not going to go through all the details here, but this is the binder course or the intermediate course. And that's our 19mm. These specifications come out of PennDOT publication 413 Super Pave Mix. PennDOT requires that 100% state funded projects and non-NHS roads, NHS stands for National Highway Systems, the traffic count is less or equal to 5,000 cars. The truck count is less or equal to 300 cars. The minimum average thickness is 2.5 inches. It cannot be used as a final surface course. So you must cap it with 1.5 inches or have to put a chip seal on top of it. That's the intermediate, the 19mm that's going down. And at the bottom kind of represents the two stockpiles, and those are designs. So typically we'll see typical designs from 15 to 25%, but we have capable approved designs with PennDOT from 25 to 50% if we decide to use those. Next, we'll move on. And this is mostly used here in a lot of the townships, a lot of the roads. This is the 9.5mm or the top of wearing groups. And this is once again out of the PennDOT spec, and these are their requirements for 100% state funded projects on non-national highway system routes. The traffic count is equal to or less than 2,000, and the truck count is equal or less than 300. The minimum pavement thickness is 1.5 inches. This is a course aggregate with a SRL, meaning skid resistance level, complying with Bulletin 14. Typically in our area, we see an H level, which we get into the question that you asked earlier. Like, so when we mill the products back in, we will separate those. We know where they're coming in. And then after we separate those piles, we have PennDOT come back in and test and certify those. And at that point, we can reuse that product and as an H level, taking away some of the aggregate that we're putting back in, which also brings us our cost savings. So there's a segregation, a certification of all that wrap once it comes back in. And we're not just doing this, you know, all of our competitors are doing this, and it's a state thing. PennDOT is overseeing all that. So this is an example here of what we talked about. So in 2012, District 11 maintenance had already done this on their own. So their crews performed this. So if you can look at that material from that slide, that's a 19, it's a binder course. It's a middle course, not even a top course. You can see how tight it is, how rich it is. But it has to be capped with either a recommended a 1.5 inch overlay with a 9.5mm or a chip seal product. The feedback we got from the field folks who placed that is a mix look adequately rich on site. It can achieve compaction quickly. The density course for testing were a correlation of 95-96%. They were comparable or better than the conventional mixes. And I was pleased with the results. The initial cost savings were encouraging. They're still doing this to this day. This thing's a little outdated, so it's closer to 11 years, and they're still using it today. This is an example of a Lindy job that we've done on a low volume road at State Road 351 in Beaver County. The scope of the project was mill, base repairs, and overlay it with 6,000 tons of 19 mm high wrap low carbon material was used. We did recommend that they did a chip seal within 1 year afterwards. Move on to the next slide here. This is the same section here, and a little bit to the left, kind of shows you our paving trend. So, this is 19 mm low volume, high recycled asphalt binder mix. It's a very consistent mat. This big white vehicle that you see after the dump truck is called a material transfer vehicle. It has an auger in it that kind of agitates the material, so that way we get a uniform mat. And the big thing you want to notice out of here is it improved the IRI of the roadway by over 70%. IRI stands for the International Roughness Index, which really means a smoothness test. So the existing road compared to that 19 mm put down, it had a 70% smoother ride than what was in there before, and that's using this high wrap material. What can local agencies do? Well, you need to stay engaged. And as David pointed out, that you need to follow the EPDs, the environmental product declarations that are going to be put out by the federal government. And every asphalt mix will have an EPD. Lindy and some other suppliers are ahead of the curve. We're already putting our EPDs and getting stuff together. There's a lot of funding around this. You know, we would like to be ahead of it with our strategic partners, Gateway, and hopefully some of the municipalities as well, like yourselves. And we also need to have a holistic approach to this. So performance is dependent on more than just the material. So we make the material, but we're usually not the ones who are paving it, because you put bids out and you have contractors doing it. So they need to be held to the same PennDOT specifications that we are, as far as laying down when we're doing the highway work. That will enable you getting a fully successful project from the material all the way through the lay down process. PennDOT certified mixes, they meet stringent material specifications, and on average is 19% wrap. And in there, we feel we can make some benefits by having the specification changes with increased wrap, because we have them available. They're already approved through PennDOT. Next slide, please. So balanced mix designs. So we heard a little bit talking about it before, and you can click on one more. This is the way the future, where we're headed with mix design. We started at the beginning in 1920 developing the standard hot mix designs, and this is all based upon testing. Then we ended up with Marshall mixes, the ID2 areas, the ID2 binders that we were used to hearing about. Then we went on to the fabulous super pave, the 9.5, the 19 mm, the 25 mm. Now we're getting into the balanced mix designs, which are going to basically be consolidating anywhere from 250 to 300 mix designs. We have to get certified every year. And then we have, it's based on specific performance and application. So the balanced mix design, so the asphalt mix design using performance tests on appropriately conditioned specimens that address multiple modes of distress, taking into consideration mix age, traffic, climate, location, and then pavement structure. This was put together by AASHTO and FHWA and ETG. AASHTO stands for the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. I heard you. Federal Highway Administration, and the ETG is the expert task force. This started in 2015, this initiative. Lindy with other suppliers are working with PennDOT currently to work on this balanced mix designs. With PennDOT to try to get ahead of this. Is something that's coming our way. The balanced mix designs, once again, are based upon testing. These are the approaches. It's a volumetric design plus performance verification, a volumetric design plus performance optimization, performance modified volumetric design, performance design. These are technical approaches to designing the new balanced asphalt mix design. It is our future in PA and with PennDOT. Some goals that we have for this initiatives are to update our pavement specifications to improve the high wrap, low carbon materials for our bids. So if we can specify them, and they're already approved now, you already start seeing cost savings, from the material side coming on you through the bid process. And also pursuing the federal and state funds, the grants which are currently available through Gateway Engineering. And I think you had a goal that you wanted to talk about for maybe a future meeting.
Well, yeah, we really want to, this was an information session. We really want to take this to the next level and maybe meet with the public work folks, talk through any concerns that they may have about this, and then eventually start to pursue those grants to get some of that federal money for you to do some of your roads.
I'm interested in moving that process along. I assume.
That was my question, actually. I wanted to ask the public works director who's here, what are his thoughts?
Sure, yeah, get more paving for the same amount of money or less money, I'm absolutely in favor,
Interested?
yes.
Yeah, we can stretch that out a little bit too. It's something that we talk about too, is once we get enough people, we want to do an open house with this, some of this, but also we want to maybe do some tours at some of our facilities. At our plant facility or quality control facility, you can see how the whole process works. So that's something we have
Sounds
to
great.
would like to plan as well.
Just for clarification, we would actually still have to put this out for bid.
Yes,
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
Yes.
So we need to also, I'd like to get input from legal as to whether or not bid specifications, depending on how they're written, I don't want them to be deemed exclusionary. because
Understood.
We,
Sure.
And they can't be, they wrap mix that.
Yeah, and not approved mixes, you know, so all of our competitors have the same style plans.
Just so that we-
do. Plus, this IRA has two components. One is for projects for the funding, the other one is to update all your plans. So all of our competitors and everybody out there, we're doing the same thing. So we're going after that same money to update our plans, and so are they. So we should all be playing for the same field.
okay, yeah, just from a process standpoint.
Understood. The one question that I like have is kind of looking at it from a life cycle cost perspective. Right, it might be cheaper to put it down, but what is it over the next
Right.
20 years? Right, does it last as long? Again, I want to know kind of annualized cost, what's it gonna cost me to have a
From a
mile
technical
approach?
standpoint, it's meeting or exceeding. So that analysis they done was a 30% wrap design was meeting or beating the 0% virgin material.
So therefore, my total cost is lower.
Yes.
Well, the cost is lower to put it down, but to Commissioner Flynn's question is, that rose, some of these roads are.
Yeah.
Potholes. That's what I'm looking for. That sort of thing.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it sounds like if it meets or exceeds what the virgin, then it'll still get potholes, it'll still do it, but at a comparable rate to.
Yeah, so we're still doing the same kind of life cycle analysis, whether it's 12 to 50 years, depending upon traffic counts, depending upon those designs. We're also doing new things as well. We're putting rejuvenators into the mixes. We're using Evotherm for more mix. We have different technology as well. And everybody, it's a national thing. It's just not our thing. So that one study that they did showing the 30% versus the virgin and getting the same or better results. I mean, that's our answer to proof of quality. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yes, it is.
Any other
Stop.
questions?
No.
That's awesome.
All right, good stuff. We're running a little behind schedule, so we're gonna skip boards and authorities. Thank you for your presentation.
Yes, thank you.
And we're gonna turn it here and see you next morning.
Yes, sir.